Hello my friends and welcome once again to another real Let's Not Meet story compilation from Reddit. This world is filled with a variety of people, but unfortunately some we never want to run into again. Here's 7 real Let's Not Meet stories from Reddit users. I'm going to start off with saying that I realize I made a ton of mistakes in my youth that could have gotten me hurt or even worse. But I was young and stupid. I had a couple encounters with some seriously shady people because of this. But the one that still haunts me to the core was Tom. Now, I first met Tom on MSN. He found my email on one of those forwarded messages one of my friends sent me. He claimed he was one of my friend's dad, and I didn't think anything of it. At the time, I was 13. That was the first time I talked to Tom. We talked about school, friends, homework, etc. And I thought he was just a cool dad that was friendly and easy to talk to. I talked to him off and on until I turned 16. When I turned 16, I was going through a lot. I'm not going to go into detail, but I was trying new things and I was just an idiot. Around this time is when Tom started getting weird. After not talking to him for a few months, Tom sent me a message randomly one night asking how I was. It just so happened to be the night that my boyfriend broke up with me. I talked to him about it, and he offered me some comfort. Then he started asking me weird questions like, what did I like to do with this boyfriend? And was I still a virgin? That kind of stuff. I just kind of quickly answered the questions and moved on my way. In the next few weeks, Tom messaged me every day. He would tell me how beautiful I was and how I deserved someone to treat me right and what he would love to do with me. It was all very strange, and sometimes I just couldn't bother with him. He also would tell me how unhappy he was with his wife, and he constantly would ask me to meet up with him, which I always said I couldn't. One day, though, he caught me on a day where I had been a little not all there in the head. In other words, I was a mixture of drunk and high. I was a complete idiot and egged him on. And for some reason, I let it slip that I was going to the movies that following night. Fast forward to that night. I'm at the movies with my friends. Now, just a little note. I had my email hooked up to my phone so my friends who didn't have cell phones could message me by email. The messages would go like this. It would show the email, and it would say that it has sent you a message. Well, I'm sitting outside the theater with my friends. My phone goes off and says that I have a message from Tom's email. The email said, "That's a nice thong you are wearing." I got instant goosebumps and looked around. About 10 meters from me was an older man who was identical to the man who was talking to me for the past 3 years, and he was staring at me. He smiled and did this little wave thing. I began to be uncomfortable and a little freaked out. I looked down and asked my friends if they wanted to go inside the theater. It was a little early, but they were all ready to go. So off we went, and my phone continued to go off. "Where are you going?" "I got something for you." There was an image with a link that I could view. Later I found out it was a dick pic. I turned my phone off and ignored the fact that he was following us to the movies. The entire movie, he sat in the very back row close to the exit. He just stared at me the entire time. Every time I looked over my shoulder. When the movie finished, I asked my friend to take me right home because I wasn't feeling well. I had to pass him to leave the theater. His face looked very angry, and I just wanted to cry. When I got home, I turned off my phone and noticed I had like 100 messages from him on my email that I quickly deleted. I went on the computer and blocked him. I deleted everything I ever had from him. I completely erased him from my life. I never told anyone this story before because I didn't want to get into trouble. But I just want to put it out there as a warning that there are really sick people out there. So, Tom, let's never meet again. Ever. Hello. I've been reading lots of stories from here, and I feel that I should share my very own experience with you all, as it was something that made me change into the person who I am today. Some info before that. I'm a Brazilian guy, 20 years old as of right now, but around 12 when this story actually happened. Just a normal school day, boring subjects, annoying people, usual. I come from a good family with a somewhat good financial situation, so back then I had with me a Motorola V3 cell phone, which was like top tier back then at the time, and also pretty uncommon for kids to have one. Every day after school, it would take a while for my father to pick me up with his car. It was a silver Mariva. It was also the same car that he used to drive me to school with. That being said, one day I was waiting for my dad to pick me up, and so I was playing some Super Mario Brothers on my DS, which I took to school. Then my cell phone rang. I answered it, and I heard the voice of a somewhat cheery man saying, "Hey Pete, it's your Uncle Paul. I'm here to pick you up for your dad. Come outside." The man said, and I simply answered with, "Okay," and left through the gate. The thing is, it was still early, way earlier than my dad usually picks me up. So I stopped and I thought about it. I went back inside and waited for another call, and it came fast. "Where are you?" the man asked. I replied with, "Yeah, I don't see you," and he sighed on the other side of the line, giving me instructions. "I'm with the same blue Corolla that I dropped you off today in the morning. Pete, come on," he said, and hung up. I could hear he was getting impatient. My 12-year-old brain processed what was happening and connected the dots. The thing is, I had no uncles named Pete. Also, it couldn't be my mother's brother, because he'd been dead for quite some time now. Last thing is that no one actually called me Pete, an American nickname, but my family, those being my brothers, my sisters, and my parents. Connecting the dots together, I started to get a bit nervous, and I talked to my friends about it. After all, some of them were still there in the parking lot. Basically, they all said, "Yeah, tell him to leave you alone." So I went to the principal for help. On my way there, the man calls me again. I pick up, and this time, he was angry. "Why are you taking so long? I'm in the blue Corolla. Are you brain dead? Get out here with that stupid video game of yours." Then he hung up. I instantly froze. Thoughts rushed through my head, such as, am I going to get kidnapped? Can this be real? And so on. I started running to the principal's office. I was getting nervous, so I called my dad. He answered in a hurry. I took a deep breath and tried not to seem scared. "Dad," I said, "did you by any chance send someone named Paul here to pick me up?" I asked. I could feel my heart pounding. I just wanted to hear that it was true. But of course, that's not what I got. "No," he said. "Whoever's calling you, don't go outside. I'll be right there," he said, and he hung up. I went inside to the office, bursting into tears and asking for someone to get the man that was probably out there waiting in the blue Corolla. I gave the teacher and the principal the number he was calling me from, and they called, but to no avail. So they decided to go outside and check for the blue Corolla by themselves. I stayed in the office. From there, I got another call. This time I picked up. I could feel my hands shaking, but I knew he couldn't harm me. "What's taking you so long?" he screamed. "Listen," I said, "I know you're no uncle of mine. You have no idea which car I came to school in, and you're trying to kidnap me for some reason. But I'm not going outside," I screamed at him. "Again," he said quietly. I screamed, "What?" and I called him sick and crazy. "You're not coming out again. You've been out. You just know better," he screamed, before laughing like a maniac, and he just hung up. I held my phone in my hands and stared at the nothingness for a while, till the teacher and principal came back and said that there was no blue Corolla outside. Shortly after, my dad arrived, and I was escorted to a taxi with him and some guards. I sat there and I did nothing as my dad talked on the phone to a number that had been calling to find someone by the name of Paul. I took the rest of the week off school, and eventually I began to have nightmares about being outside of school and being grabbed. After what happened, I went back to school the next week and instantly joined the kendo club in order to know something about self-defense, especially if I had the chance to be armed with something. Years later, my mom and dad divorced. I saw that coming. After when this episode happened, I was living with my older brother because they didn't want to involve me in their fights. However, once I came back home with my mom, I found out that they had divorced because my father had about 5 different lovers in 5 different places, and one even called my mom saying, "You won. I've tried everything to keep him for myself, but you can't," or at least that's what my mother says. I wondered if all this kidnapping could be part of some sort of scheme from one of these lovers to steal my dad from us. If it was, then I guess that makes me uncomfortable to know that a human being is capable of probably killing a kid for whatever reason they want. Good thing is that I'm 20 now, a teacher, and a regional champion of kendo, and I've never heard of Paul ever again. But I still wonder what would have happened to me if I didn't have the decency to go back inside and keep looking for him. So, Uncle Paul, let's not meet. This happened a few years ago. I thought nothing of it at the time, but thinking back, it's actually kind of creepy. A while ago, I was a dumb little preteen who was still really naive and trusting. I was always on this site where you could post stories and talk to people, as well as my friend Brianna. We were fairly close, but polar opposites in some cases. While I talked to maybe 1 or 2 people on that site, she had over 50 conversations at once. Not only did she talk to tons of people, but she was very trusting, even more than I was. She'd given people pictures of herself. She dated them after only knowing them a few weeks, and other things like that. Again, we were fairly young, around 12 years old kind of young, so really just seemed kind of stupid. Anyway, she started telling me about this one guy she met. He's in his mid-20s. He's some sort of hot emo guy. She shows me a few pictures, none of which have his face showing. I remember one of them. He was sitting in a car with the sunglasses on and a hat with a derogatory word on it. That's the thing that sticks out in my mind. I voice my concerns, but she ignores them. Fast forward a few weeks, and she's asking me for my Skype so she can talk to him. She already had his number, and she was texting him, but I guess she wanted to hear his voice. Who knows? The dude supposedly lived in New Jersey, so she probably thought she'd get a bigger bill, so she didn't call him on her phone. I don't know. Either way, I say yes, and she calls him. So they talked. She didn't have anything to Skype on, so she had to wait until I came over and brought my computer to talk to him. and she always turned on the camera. I was usually sitting next to her. Sometimes he even talked to me. I guess he seemed nice enough, but I didn't know him long enough to grow too attached. Brianna grew really close to him. I heard talk that if her parents got too annoying, she'd just run away and go live with this guy. I know, I told her it was stupid, but she didn't listen. Thankfully, she soon got her phone and tablet taken away for who knows what. Once that happened, the dude stopped talking to me. He sent the occasional message to me, but it was clear he was looking for Brianna. Bro never crossed my mind until about a week ago. Thinking back, there are a few warning signs that this guy was a total creep. He wouldn't talk to anyone but Brianna. And trust me, she tried to introduce him to a few people. She was really close to him, so I assume when I wasn't around, he was grooming her. The thing that really freaked me out was the nagging feeling that the picture he sent with the hat looked familiar. So I looked it up, and lo and behold, there he is in all his glory. If you're curious, look up "scene guys" on Google Images. You'll find him. Obviously, I was creeped out, and I told Brianna and I's mutual friend about all this. Apparently, they were told by Brianna that this guy was a model or something, and that's why you'd find the pictures around. Who knows what would have happened if her stuff hadn't been taken away. He'd seen our faces. He knew our names. And God knows what else she told him. Emo guy, let's never meet again. Please. This is my first time posting, so I'm sorry if anything's wrong. Okay, so a bit of background. When I was 12, my family moved to a new house. This house was on a long street. Halfway down the street, it intercepted with another street in a cross-like formation. On the northwest section, a forest starts, and from there it's all woods behind our houses, except for when you're about 2/3 of the way down the street, there's a closed preschool. Well, I lived 4 houses down from that preschool. My house was in front of a baseball field that was part of the school. The school property was like a big rectangle. Then behind it was the forest. It was big, but not that big. It was basically about 300 feet from my house to the forest. This was a big forest. It was basically in the edge of town, and at the end of the forest, another town started. So this is a 2-part story. The first part takes place when I was 14. My sister and I decided to go walk in the forest. There's a couple walking trails, and people used to go sometimes. Now, we were about a mile into the forest and just talking, when suddenly we start hearing whispers. Now we're in the part of the forest where it's kind of like an open field with tall grass. Then the trees begin again. We had no idea where the whispers were coming from, so we just kept looking around, and there was no one. Up to this point, we were super creeped out, and we started running. We probably made it back to our house in about 5 minutes. After we got home, we just kind of forgot about it. We didn't really go back into the forest for a while. So the second part now takes place when I'm 17. We had these 2 dogs, and well, like any other dogs, they wanted to go for walks. So my siblings and I used to divide the days to walk them. On my day, I was kind of lazy. I decided to go back into the forest and walk them there. So I cross the baseball field and go to the entrance of the forest. I'm about 20 feet into the forest, and everything's normal until I turn and there's this man. I immediately freeze. Now this guy looks straight out of like hillbilly land. He has jeans that are too big for him. He's wearing a whitish shirt and a jacket. He's super covered in dirt. He has a huge beard and a giant gun, like a hunting rifle. He's surrounded by 3 dogs, and they're walking across the open field. I'm standing there for what felt like an eternity, but was more like a minute. As soon as I came to, I started pulling my dogs and basically running out of there. I don't really know if he saw me or was just ignoring me, but I can tell you that I never went back there. I had a friend that used to live 6 houses down from me. Where she lived, after their backyards, it was just forest. They weren't by the preschool. We were hanging out once, and I decided to tell her the story. That's when she told me her own story. She told me that her brother and his friends once decided to go to the forest and explore. They were quite well into the forest when they saw smoke and decided to go towards it. Before they got there, they ran into the man who held a shotgun to them and told them to get off his property. Now, this property wasn't his because the forest basically belonged to the state. No one was supposed to live there. They decided not to tell their parents because they didn't want to get into trouble for exploring into the forest. Turns out a bunch of kids had run into that man, but most of them were high or drunk and either thought they imagined the whole thing or decided not to tell anyone in fear of getting in trouble for being high or drunk. I haven't heard of anyone running into him anymore, but we moved away, and those moments, for some reason, stuck with me, since I had never been more scared in my life before. So, man with a gun, please let's not meet. Note from original poster. I'm completely new to Reddit, so this may not be written very well. I'm also recalling things that happened to me over a year ago, so if my thoughts seem scattered, it's only because there's a lot to remember about this situation. Last year, I was temporarily a host at a restaurant, which was not very popular, so we were often not busy. One midday shift, I hadn't seen a customer in a while when this old, short, stocky man came in and asked for a table near a window. I sat him in the section of my friend Mariah. Each waiter and waitress had their own 3 to 4 table section of the restaurant and went in rotation between sections to keep the number of customers being seated fair. Mariah was in college, and this man was easily around 65 years or older. My host stand was close enough to their table to hear the conversations that became weirder by the minute. He kept mentioning that he worked for a towing service. He looked quite past retirement age, to be honest. He just kept complimenting her. It was seemingly innocent things at first, like, "You have a pretty smile," or "You're a great waitress," to which she kind of nervously laughed and would say something to the effect of, "Oh, thank you," thinking he was a lonely old man just trying to be nice. But then his compliments kept getting stranger, like, "With a body like that, you must have a boyfriend," or "I wish my ex-wife looked like you when we met." At one point, she felt him trying to grab her behind as she was walking away from him. She got so uncomfortable that she ended up having our male friend Chad finish waiting on the man, giving the excuse that her shift was over, when she really just went in the kitchen and literally hid from him until he left. When Chad came to be his waiter, the guy lost his cheerfulness, and he looked genuinely angry. I started to feel actually afraid at this point, thinking that he might try to prey on me next, as I was about the same age as Mariah and was in the same area of the restaurant as this guy. Luckily, he didn't. He just quickly finished eating while hardly speaking or looking at Chad, and left without saying a word. The guy left a tip of 5 and 1s and wrote Mariah on each one, front and back, with a pen from his pocket. I assume he was trying to make sure Chad didn't get any of this money. Our manager gave Mariah permission to avoid this guy any time he came in because of how he behaved. A few days later, he came in again and asked for Mariah. Her shift didn't start for over an hour, so I told him I would have to seat him with someone else, but he refused. He insisted on waiting. He waited at a table that was meant to be her section and literally sat down and prepared to wait over an hour. I went and got our manager, and he told the man he couldn't let him wait that long for her in that section, but he could sit him with another waiter. Guy left without saying anything. The main phone line for the restaurant was at the host stand, so we could make reservations, and this guy called me the next day asking to talk to Mariah. I could tell by his voice that it was that same man, so I played stupid and said, "Can I ask who's calling?" And he just said, "No, put her on." I got my manager. He picked up the phone saying, "Hi, sir. This is the manager. How can I help you?" The guy paused. She's not here. Can I take a message?" I watched his face when he listened to what the guy said, and he looked like he was about to throw up. He hung up on the man without saying a word. He wouldn't tell me what the guy said to him, but it was clearly something disgusting aimed towards Mariah. We ended up having to tell this guy that she didn't work there anymore, so he would quit asking for her. After he was told that, he never came back. I honestly have no idea what this guy's problem was, but I hope he never goes back there. For Mariah's sake. This happened during the summer of 2004. I lived with my husband and children in a small town about 50 miles outside of a major city. My town is relatively quiet without much crime, but we do get the occasional break-in and other petty crimes. I should also note that my area seems to get many door-to-door salesmen and church groups, but I generally consider it more annoying than anything menacing. It was around 10 a.m. I was home alone, cleaning the house and listening to Metallica. I had my front window open that faces my front door, as we don't have central air, and it was pretty hot that day. Someone knocks on my door, and I look through the window to see a girl I would guess is in her early 20s, standing there. She has a clipboard and pen in her hand. I assume she's selling something. I turn off my music and open the door, ready to tell her I'm not interested. She immediately hands me a laminated card with a list of magazines she's selling. I'm holding this card, not really reading it, and was about to hand it back when I flip the card over and see written in red pen, "This girl is crazy. Do not let her in your house." I read this and I'm about to go slam the door when she says, "I love Metallica. Turn it back on." She pushed her way past me and sat down on my couch in my living room, which is about 5 feet away from the front door. I'm still standing in the doorway of my living room in utter shock. I just stare at her for 5 to 10 seconds before I find my voice. I tell her she needs to leave now. She lit up a cigarette and walks over to my stereo to turn the music back on. By this point, I'm completely freaking out and walk to my kitchen to grab my phone to call the police. She ran out the door before I could even dial. I live 2 blocks away from a police station, and they're there in less than 5 minutes. Long story short, they aren't able to find her, but they tell me that they've gotten complaints about someone that fits her description from other people in the area as well. A neighbor down the block told me she came to her door too. She didn't try to go into her house, but she was super pushy and kept saying odd things like, "We need to go shopping sometimes," and other sense. So, creepy magazine salesgirl, Metallica fan, let's not meet again. This happened to me about a year ago. A little info about myself. I'm a 19-year-old girl. I'm also very small, about 4'11", and I weigh 95 pounds soaking wet. My 11th grade year of high school is when the event took place. It was within the first 2 weeks of school, and I was a bus rider. We had a new bus driver. Me being a very social person, I always made sure to thank him for his service and was very nice to him. I believe that's where I messed up. One day after school, I was riding the bus. I was always one of the first to be dropped off. So when I realized I'd been on the bus for an extra 10 minutes, I was a little curious and chalked it up to the fact that the bus routes get changed all the time. At this point, I've been on the bus for about 30 minutes, and there are 2 kids left on the bus. An old friend of mine, and of course myself. This friend of mine lived in a very remote location, and there's absolutely no cell service out there, so when we were dropped off, I couldn't call my parents to let them know what was happening. As we were leaving this area, the bus driver pulled into a cemetery and told me to look out my window. When I did, I saw a torn-to-shreds baby deer. My whole body went into shutdown mode. I didn't know what to do. My initial reaction was to pull out my phone and call my parents, but then I remembered I had no signal. I immediately got up and ran to the back of the bus. Keep in mind I'm the only kid on this bus. We sit by the deer for a good 10 minutes, and the whole time I'm in the back and my blood is absolutely boiling. It was everything to me to just not run off the bus and look for help. When we started to leave, he just started talking about random stuff, how he loves his wife and loves his new job as a bus driver. The whole time he's barely paying attention to the road. I get on my phone and go to Google Maps. Thank God they work even without service. I realized my house was 15 minutes from where we were and was super excited to be going home soon. Boy, was I wrong. He decides to keep talking to me and drive onto the back roads. All the while, I'm sitting in silence, still with no service on my phone. About 20 to 25 minutes later, I start seeing landmarks that are around my neighborhood. I look down and there's finally service on my phone. I immediately call my dad. He doesn't answer. Not even 2 minutes later, we pull into my neighborhood and he drops me off at my house. I wanted to run, but for some reason I just stood in my yard and stared at him, frozen in fear. Eventually he pulled off, and when he did, I took off running into my house. My parents were in there, freaking out, wondering where I was. My mom started grilling me about what I was doing. I get out of school at 2:15 and got home around 4:45. On a normal day, I would get home at about 2:30, so my mom was very upset. My dad's phone was dead because he tried to call me so many times. I began to cry and tell them everything that happened. My dad was furious and called the school and used my mom's phone to record the whole conversation between my dad, the principal, and myself. The principal was very angry about what had taken place, as was my dad. My mother was just cuddling me, asking me if I was okay and if anything else happened. I didn't go back to school for about 2 days. There was no formal investigation. The school handled it themselves. The bus driver denied everything, and when they checked camera footage, the camera happened to be covered by a sticker or something of the sort. Thankfully, nobody believed the bus driver, and he was fired. I haven't been able to ride a bus ever since. I know this isn't as creepy as most stories, but it's mine, and it's still the most bone-chilling experience I've ever had. So, creepy bus driver, let's not meet. For your sake. All stories read here have been given permission for me to narrate by the posting users following Reddit's submission content and guidelines. Proof of this permission is in the description below. That's all the time I have for today, my friends. I hope you're having a wonderful day or evening. Ami Mori. Now, listen to the spooky tunes.